welcome to the final session of Forum 2022. Our aim in the next half an hour or so is to take stock a little from earlier sessions, but also to cast an eye to the future. It's been a tumultuous 2 years, I think we all agree, and now this week Europe finds itself with war on its borders and potentially lasting social and economic consequences. So how does this change our sense of Europe's future? To reflect on what needs to be in place to help meet the challenges and to sustain a socially cohesive and resilient Europe, I'm joined here today in the studio by Emmy Coffey Nguyen. Emmy is an advocate for youth issues and Ireland's alternative citizen representative to the Conference on the Future of Europe. And remotely, I'm also delighted to have with us Liselotte Lyngsø. Liselotte is managing partner of innovation and foresight consultancy Future Navigator, which is based in Copenhagen. And finally, we're joined by Ivan Krastev, who is chair of the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia. Ivan is also a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna and may be known to many of you for his regular contributions to the New York Times on European and global affairs. I'd like to start with Ivan first of all. Ivan, the future of Europe looks quite different today than it did 2 weeks ago before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If we look back, our union was born in the aftermath of 2 world wars. It's consolidated itself around ideas of democracy, social market economies, the rule of law, and individual and collective liberties. But it has paid less attention probably to issues of collective security. So my question to you is, have we been too complacent?
Yes, we were. But it is going slightly deeper than this. If you see one of the best history of Europe since 1945, written by a British-American historian, Tony Judd, is called Post-War. And for him, basically, Europe was post-war in 2 different senses. On one, because basically it was shaped by the legacies of the World War II. But secondly, because for the Europeans, particularly after the end of the Cold War, the idea of a major war in Europe was perceived as unthinkable. And from this point of view, we're in a kind of a very critical moment because suddenly we start seeing our own continent from a post-war in a kind of a pre-war situation. And it is not simply that the war is now perceived possible. It's interesting to see how quickly people, like now in Vienna, you can see people going to the pharmacy. They're very much afraid of a possible nuclear war and others, how quickly this sentiment has changed. But secondly, some of the very idea of what makes Europeans secure has been changed. In a certain way, the idea of security for the Europeans in the last 30 years was very much based, first on the idea of economic interdependency. The more you're trading with somebody, the more you're depending to each other, the more secure you are. And now in the world in which basically our contacts and our connections were weaponized, the fact that you're dependent on somebody is becoming not a security, but insecurity and vulnerability. Secondly, Europe was very much about soft power. We very much believe that the power that really matters is the attractiveness of your own social, political, economic models. And Europeans have been very much kind of a skeptical to the purchase power of the military might in this world. And now we are discovering that basically hard power matters. And it particularly matters when you don't have it. So from this point of view, we are going, in my view, to see the major rethinking of European project. It's not simply that you have a kind of a war on your doorstep, but many of the things that basically we have been building our idea of security on are going to be totally rethought. And it's enough to see that it basically took a day for President Putin to invade Ukraine, and in this same day, he succeeded to kill Swedish neutrality, German pacifism, basically the view of migration on East Europeans, which till yesterday basically have been keeping their borders closed. And now you see almost 1 million people crossing the borders and being very much welcomed in countries like Poland or Slovakia or Hungary. So this is a totally new situation, and everything happened so quickly. The escalation of the sanction regime for the last 1 week with respect to Russia, in the case of Iran, the same escalation took 2 years. So this is why, and I want to end up on this, we are living in one of those moments in which history kind of acts so fast that the most difficult for us is to understand how different today is from yesterday.
Thanks a lot, Ivan. I think we'll come back to this idea of history moving very fast and also to this idea that Europe has maybe to deviate from its past basis of soft power, where it tries to project certain values to the rest of the world and needs to actually try and defend those values in a different way, in a more robust way. Liselotte, I'd like to digress for a moment from the sad events on our eastern borders. As discussed in earlier sessions, one overarching goal of the EU is the achievement of carbon neutrality over the next generation. And we're going to do this, for example, through huge investment in the Green New Deal. So policy clearly will play a big part in this, but so will cultural and behavioural change. But I'm going to ask you about a different contributor, and that's technology and innovation. As in your role as a foresight specialist, to what extent do you think we can rely on technology innovation, so on our ingenuity as a species, to do the heavy lifting when it comes to achieving our carbon goals?
That's going to have a huge impact, and as Ivan was just telling, you can use technology for evil, but you can also use technology for good. And as futurists, what we see is a transition first from the agricultural society to the industrial society, then to the information society. And what will have a huge impact on carbon neutrality is going to be the precision society that we're moving into right now, where we're going to shake our heads and say, I can't believe we had cars parked for 90% of the time, just standing there without adding value, just clogging up society. I can't believe that we put out all these fertilizers, ruining our drinking water, that we didn't know precisely, what was needed. And we all had the same headache pills rather than, completely tailoring it to the individual. With regard to indoor climate, I only need my heat here and my indoor climate here. So really I can turn off the heat or the aircon in any other place that I'm not based. And that's really a game changer, that we start being much more aware of when is enough. What do we actually need, in a sense that less is more for the planet and people.
Thanks a lot, Liselotte. So this idea of a precision economy, basically maybe you could just explain or elaborate a little bit more about what a precision economy might mean.
Well, so in technological terms, it really means that we have more or less a digital twin registering every movement. And this will really take some supercomputing power that we don't have today, but we have some kind of pattern recognition. You can see all the satellites being sent up at the moment. So it's really the Internet of Things communicating. And not only that, they will also be able to translate to us what makes sense. How much food production should we have in Europe in order to avoid waste? Is it worth the while that I should have a vaccine booster, or should I send it to Bangladesh to a person who haven't had it yet? So you'll have these big calculations that are giving you some insights in terms of this precision. Where will it actually make the sustainability impact in order that we use less CO2, but also in terms of making people thrive?
Thanks a lot, Liselotte. So it's about the twin transitions linking with each other, if you like. The digital transition and new digital tools helping us to be a bit more resource efficient.
Exactly. We already saw it with the access economy. Should we all have the same things, or could we partake? And here it's really interesting if we can do that at a pan-European level, not only in terms of physical stuff that we share, but also in terms of mental stuff. And it's really, really terrible what is happening in Ukraine right now. But as we've seen with finding a vaccine, as we might see now, we will put our heads together in order to think together, and that could be very beneficial.
Thanks a lot, Liselotte. Emmy, live in studio. It seems to me that young people are more attuned, if anything, to the twin transitions agenda than their older counterparts. You tend to be digital natives, you're comfortable with technology, and from talking to you personally over the last few days, it's clear that you're very much aware of what it is at stake as regards the climate agenda. Europe has made climate commitments that go beyond those of other regions in the world, but from a young person's perspective, are we going fast enough? Are we doing enough?
Well, the very short answer to your question, John, is no. And I'm not alone in thinking that way, as we can see throughout Europe with the various protests and marches that have even happened here in Dublin on a Friday afternoon, for example. I think that while Europe has made some really positive strides and commitments in the form of the European Green Deal, Fit for 55, and also the various directives in place to help companies report on sustainability and their corporate social responsibility, should I say, is it enough? And I really question that deeply, because we're at a point in time where the IPCC has obviously come out with another report. I personally don't think we need another report to tell us exactly what's going to happen, but it's the pace of change that I'm really concerned with as a young person. And I am actually even more personally offended by some of the commitments by Europe. For example, with the EU taxonomy labelling nuclear energy and also another fossil fuel gas as green and clean, it's just not the way forward. And I really do feel quite strongly about that. One way we could obviously go about things differently, I think, is to look at fossil fuel in a way that of nuclear warheads, for instance. It's a perilous place to be, to end up using nuclear arms or nuclear warheads. So I would like to see a similar approach with fossil fuels. So why don't we look at fossil fuel and I'm losing the words here, but proliferation of fossil fuels, and to have that scaled back each year. I think relying on companies setting targets for 2050 and seeing whether or not they reach them in time, it's not going to bring us into a place where we actually in fact need radical change. And personally speaking, I am 30 years of age right now, and I am having to think about whether I should have children in the next couple of years or not, given the way things are going in the years to come. Our governments at the moment are, implementing policies will actually bring us to 2.7 degrees. So if we think about that, we really need to start acting very, very quickly.
Okay, so you think that we have the Fit for 55 objectives where we make significant commitments in terms of reducing our carbon emissions by 2030, and that's a roadmap to carbon neutrality by 2050, and you think we should be going faster?
I do, and when we talk about just transition, and I've heard of it a lot throughout the sessions today. For us to really actually have a just transition, we would in fact need to achieve some of these goals by 2030, 2035. And that, when I think of just transition, I don't think of just Europe. I think of the Southern Hemisphere, where they're experiencing it at worst there right now. If you look at Chile right now with the wildfires, Australia with its floods. For there to be a just transition, we also need to allow time to those other countries who are less rich than us in various ways, to give them that time to transition to what we need right now.
Thanks a lot, Emmy. I think it's fair to say that the younger perspective on climate change tends to be more radical, tends to be probably more progressive in some ways than that of the people of my age. So it's very interesting to hear that expressed so clearly. Liselotte, just to return to you and just to reflect some of the focus of Eurofound's work, we have a core focus in our research on the world of work. There's much research on how technology will impact on employment in the future. One counterintuitive idea that I've heard you express, and which I think is very interesting, is that technology will help us to humanize work. And it's going to do this by getting us to concentrate a little bit more on those tasks in which humans excel and where we have a comparative advantage over machines and artificial intelligence. So first of all, I'd like to ask you, what sort of tasks are these tasks in which humans excel? And maybe just a wider second question, are there enough of them to keep us all actively employed? Big questions. Liselotte.
Yeah, big questions, and I'll answer them in 2 minutes. First of all, what we experience is a human factor, also looking to the history, that as soon as one need has been solved, it's like the Hydra's heads, there are other needs emerging. So what we see, for instance, within the health sector, which is becoming extremely digital and people are measuring on themselves, then they suddenly have all kinds of demands and longings. So yes, I think we will be very busy at doing what we will see some machines that are finally being very good at being machines. So freeing us up to be less like machines, actually looking far more into the planet, to humanity. What do I mean by that? For instance, frustration, as we just heard before, that's going to be a very important feeling, because machines do not get frustrated. People do, and that is actually a very important way of creating a pattern change to change society. Laziness is a unique human trait as well, that I know a lot of us have, and which has been a part of innovating society for a long time, but also ethics. Who do we want to be in the world? Identity, but also longing. And we have never been as lonely and living by ourselves, even though we've been communicating so much. So there are plenty of things to work on in this future, and we're going to do it in many different dimensions in a metaverse and in physical life. And we are extremely busy, for instance, solving some of the environmental problems that has been delivered to us by the former generation. So yes, I think it's extremely important that everybody is getting engaged, that everybody is active, that we are not leaning back in Europe, binging information, but that every citizen see themselves as being able to contribute to society. That is number one reason to feel happy. So I would dread a different future from that. So, and hopefully we're going to do all the fun stuff, and the machines are going to do the hard and a little boring work.
It would be pretty to think so, Liselotte. And do you think there's a lot of discussion, especially amongst foresight experts, about the prospect of technological unemployment, that machines will basically end up doing many of the things to allow us as humans to have the kind of spread of paid employment that we have at the moment? Do you think that's a possibility?
Of course, you can have this.
Do you think that the prospect of full employment?
I think the prospect of full employment is possible, but we have to redefine what is work, and we have to redefine, how do we contribute in society, and we have to redefine the expectations to one another, and we have to go from retirement to breaks, and we have to be beginners many times in our life. But we're really moving into a situation, as Evan was talking about as well, that is accelerating, so that science fiction is moving into science fact. We have never had so many tools at our disposal. So now it's really important that we pose the good questions to ourselves. What sort of Europe do we want?
Thanks a lot, Liselotte. And maybe just moving to Emmy, again, on the theme of work, Emmy, demographic trends suggest that today's youth will have plenty of work opportunities as adults. To best avail of these opportunities, higher education has become increasingly indispensable. But the majority of young people in Europe do not go to third level colleges and graduate. And I just want to know from your perspective as a young person, do you consider that a problem? Is that a problem? The fact that less than a half of our younger people graduate from third level institutions?
Well, first off, I was actually quite surprised to hear that, but I think that also is an indicator to us how things are changing and how things are moving. From my perspective, I don't necessarily think a higher education is necessary in some respects. Obviously, if you are going into medicine, you will obviously need to go to college for that, and the same if you were to become a lawyer. But I do think that we are now a generation where we have access to technology, and I think providing digital skills that are required to build a website or to maybe build something in the metaverse. I think they're the types of skills now that young people are looking at and seeing opportunities in. I think that it depends on how you look at the problem and in what particular areas. But for the most part, I think we're moving rather quickly through this technological revolution, and with it, I think there will be reforms needed within third level education. Personally speaking, if we were to look back a good few years ago during the financial crisis, I nearly didn't finish my education just because of the financial problems we found ourselves in. And I think that right now we're in a much better position where we can provide digital skills, and there are other non-traditional methods to learn as well. So I think it really just depends on how you look at the problem.
So we needn't fetishize university attendance and graduate degrees. There are other ways of learning.
I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that third level education needs to be accessible, and we do need to remove barriers. For instance, in my particular case, we just didn't have the finances to possibly attend college or finish it. So we need to look at individual and their own circumstances and see, what is it that they're experiencing. For instance, there are families out there who have parents who are quite ill, who have disabilities. Are they going to be able to first, complete higher education if they're full-time carer? The likelihood is not. So we do need to look at those other maybe niche areas, if you like, that maybe we're not catering to enough.
Okay, and the idea of universal, we talked about universal basic services in the last session. The idea of universal access to third level university, which would be free at free of access. Is that part of a type of future that you would encourage?
Absolutely. I think that it provides an equal platform for people to be educated in many different things, and if we remove those barriers, it also has the ability to reduce poverty and inequalities. As a young woman of mixed heritage, it might be a little bit harder for me to get into certain areas of business to have my voice heard, but thankfully that's not the case here today. So yes.
Well, we're delighted to have you, but I think we probably both agree that education is one of the important bases of any way of tackling inequality going forward. Ivan, if I could conclude with you, in our chat the other day, we talked about the two most recent crises that we've experienced in Europe. First of all, the COVID crisis in March 2020, and more recently, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And you described both of these episodes as accelerators. You also mentioned the importance of societal resilience. And I'd like maybe to expand a little, first of all, on the idea of crises as accelerators. And if things, this is my reflection, if things do start to move a little bit faster, doesn't the very idea that things move faster undermine to a certain extent our stability or resilience as a society? So accelerators first of all, and then maybe the second part of the question.
Thank you very much. And for me, this is critically important, because you have these two crises just following one the other, and all of them you have the feeling that happen things that we never expected to happen. And by the way, historically, it is shown that we people know how to remember wars. We don't know how to remember pandemics. More people died from Spanish flu than from the World War I, but there were 80 times more books being written about World War I than about pandemics. Why I'm saying all this? Because both of these crises did not change the trends that we have been seeing before, but they totally change the kind of speed with which these changes were taking place. We have seen certain type of deglobalization. We have been seeing certain crises of the supply chains. We are seeing digitalization. All this was before the pandemic. But then over a period of 2 years, all this had a totally different scale, totally different speed. And also basically a much more geopolitically confrontational world was not born yesterday. The conflict basically and certain policies of President Putin, they're not from yesterday. But of course, with the invasion of Ukraine, you have a totally new critical moment in which you start to perceive everything differently. And here comes the resilience. And in my view, you're asking the basic question. For many people, the resilience is the way to keep the status quo. The idea is we should not allow others to change us. And I do believe it's very important. Resilience is about manage to preserve your values and your way of life. But at least for me, resilience is a transformative concept. It's not a static one. If we really believe that resilience is just to defend the world as we know it, we are doomed. From this point of view is how to try in this new situation to change our societies, understanding that it is not enough basically simply to believe that soft power and exporting our model is how the world is going to develop, but basically that others will also try to change us. And for me, the most important about resilience, it starts with knowing your own society. And this is not easy. For example, look at the COVID. On one level, it was great success. There was exactly this vaccine that had been created in less than a year. A lot of human lives have been saved. On the other side, we have a deepening of mistrust towards the elites, towards the mainstream media. And all this we're going to see probably in the case of basically the Ukrainian crisis and what follows. Because now we're focused on one level of what is happening in Ukraine and basically the resistance of the Ukrainian people and what is happening in Russia. But then in 2, in 3, or 4 weeks, we're going to see also how our sanctions that now are trying basically to stop Russia are going to affect us. And from this point of view, resilience is not simply the kind of a damage that you can put on others. It's much more the possibility and the capacity to endure pain yourself, standing basically for your way of life, for your values. And from this point of view, there are going to be a very fierce debates about priorities, about certain things, about green transition and this new idea of creating a new security identity for the European Union. This is the same money. So we're back in the world of Isaiah Berlin, in which you're not choosing between good and evil. You're choosing between values that you basically both of them in a certain way you value a lot, and any choice that you're going to make is also a sacrifice and loss of something that is dear to you.
Thanks a lot, Ivan. So, I mean, I take it that in some ways the events of the last few weeks are clarifying in terms of consolidating our sense of our own values as Europeans. Would that be a conclusion?
Absolutely. Now we know basically what we don't want to happen. So the problem is to show that it is not going to happen.
Thanks a lot, Ivan. I think we're going to end there. Thanks a lot, Ivan, Liselotte, and Emmy for your contributions over the last half an hour. We've not had enough time to take a final takeaway from each of the panelists. But if I may offer one, I think that our common values as European citizens have come very clearly into focus over the last week. Free, open and democratic societies working together tend to do better together. They can reasonably aspire to upwards convergence, and they can also contribute to global goods, for example, by leading the climate change agenda, even if I take Emmy's point that we may not be doing quite as much as we should be. But equally, our status as free, open and democratic societies is, as Nicholas Schmidt said earlier, it's fragile. It cannot be taken for granted. It has to be nurtured. So I'm going to end on that point, which I hope summarizes a little bit some of our discussion over the last half an hour, as well as from the earlier sessions. Thank you again to all of the speakers for what I hope you agree was a particularly interesting discussion. Thank you to the audience for following us for the last half an hour. And as we reach the end of Forum 2022, I'd like to hand over now to our Executive Director, Ivailo Kalfin, for some concluding remarks. Thank you.